Welcome to Friends. It's now February and it's snowing outside. So normally one goes for comfort foods, but what I do is I go for comfort sewing. So I made the decision that I'm going to do another one of my favorite projects, my art dolls. So what I'm going to be doing is I'd like to share with you some of the techniques that I've been using on making my art dolls. This particular piece is going to incorporate the use of t-shirt fabric. And what I've done with this one is I've done some sewing with my machine, what I call quilting fabric. And on the other side is just another t-shirt. And then I've also used piping on the side, which I'll show you how to do. One of the focuses that I would like to do for this particular project is to share some of my techniques and tips. Two in particular. One is cutting out your patterns, and secondly, some of the basic stitching that you'll be doing on these projects. The other thing that I'm doing on this particular one is I've made some cording, which I'm going to make a tail out of from my little I-cord machine. So this should be a fun project, and as I go through the project, I'll share any of the new techniques that I come across, and at the end of it, I'll present you with my art doll. Now, there is a tip. If you go to the web page, there's a link on the web page as to where you can get some of these patterns. But these particular patterns that I use, they are paid for patterns. But there's a ton of stuff on the internet that you can get to use that are free patterns. So join me with this particular project, and we'll have some fun. One of the little tricks that I use when cutting out pattern pieces is if you're going to have pieces that are reversed. What I used to do is cut out one side and then the other. And how often do you end up with two of the same, and which wastes material? So what I do now is I put all the pieces that have to have reversed pieces always on the back side. So instead of having them on the front, like so, we turn them over and all of them are on the back. So that way, all of your backs are cut at one time. Then what you do is you reverse all the pattern pieces to the right side and then cut those out. And that avoids issues with duplicating and wasting your fabric. Now my pattern pieces are all ready to cut out. Now, I don't want to give out any misinformation, but for myself only, I find that when I'm working with a felt, I don't always go with the grain line. If I'm working with a fabric, I definitely do use the grain line format. But I think with the felt, you can maybe get away with it. Some people would say, oh my gosh, that's an absolute no-no, but it seems to have worked for me. After I've cut out all of the pieces, what I then do is I match the fronts to the backs, and that way you won't get confused in putting a leg to an arm or that type of thing. So it makes it a little bit easier. Now, all the pieces have been cut out for my project, and now it's time to start sewing. So as you can see, my material has been stabilized, and then I've got my two pieces to put together. On one side is a marking for my joint, and I always sew the pattern pieces together, always having that joint mark on the upside. And the term that they use for it to make sure that your pieces aren't going to be a little wonky is mirror imaging. So it's important. So that's a little tip to always sew with that marking on the top. Secondly, what you want to do is there's an opening that you'll be turning over. And what I do is I used to do a zigzag stitch to help stop fraying, but I found that the zigzag made my material stretch a bit. So all I do now is I do a stitching of 1/4 of an inch just along that opening. And then you've got it covered. When you turn it inside out for when you're going to be sewing it, what you'll see is just that seam line, and you can sew your two pieces together using that as a guide. Then what I do is I take my piece to the machine, and big pieces I don't always overcast. On small pieces, I generally do all the time. So what I've done on this particular piece is we're going to sew down to the opening, and I usually start a little bit down from the end. That way, you're not going to get that amount of pushing, so that your piece is going to be nice and even at the top. Then I'll sew down, and then I'll do a couple of back and forth stitches where the opening is, and then I'll turn the fabric around on my machine and then sew back on that same line all the way back down to incorporate the very end of it. And that way it gives you 2 lines of stitching, which gives you a much more stable piece when you go to stuff. Secondly, when you've got your piece to maybe putting in a foot pad or a paw pad, is I use a technique on when putting it in. I always overcast with a blanket stitch. I used to always, do the usual pushing it through and not going straight up and down. And I would always get a bit of a curve so that it would never come out even, especially when you're working with seams, and you want those seams to be absolutely perfect. So I find that the blanket stitch that I use does a great job at keeping it nice and straight, and it gives me also a little bit more stability. So I use the blanket stitch all the time for any overcasting that I do, and I find that it's a technique that I really do enjoy. Now, also with the blanket stitch, when you go to turn your pattern piece inside out, it'll give you that really nice, firm finish to your foot pad or whatever you're working on. So that's a particular tip that I like to use, and I find it very, very effective. All the pieces of the project have now been sewn together, and it's time to move on to the next step. Working with the joints, making the holes in the fabric of each of the pieces, like the legs and the arms and the body, to accept the joints. I've glued screws to the back sides of my discs. That's my husband has made for me, especially with the tool that he has in his workshop. And I put them together, and then the next part will be working on the stuffing. I'm going to do a tutorial specifically on what you can use to make joints, as well as one on some of the little tips about actually stuffing your specific project. I'd like to spend some time talking about actually stuffing your art doll project. It's probably one of the most crucial parts of working with your project to get a good result. Now, when it comes to the stuffing, you can pretty well use anything, but I find the best that I like to use is just polyester fiber. Now, it can be quite expensive buying it in sewing shops, etc. So what I've started to do is I buy pillows, either at the dollar store. I think you pay about $3.50, $4 for a bag, and that's what I use for stuffing. I keep the outer cover of the pillow that I've bought, and I use it for some other project or for underlining, and then I've got my polyester fiber for filling my project. Now, the tools that I use are a few. I have a really special tool that can't remember where I got it, but it's an actual teddy bear stuffing tool. It has the little end. It's not really pointed. It's got the little edge on there, so it's not going to push through your fabric, and on the blunt end on the back. And I use this tool every single time I do any type of stuffing. I also have a pair of little tweezers here that I push into very fine corners on what I'm stuffing. And then also another pair of tweezers for taking your stuffing and putting it into your bear. Now, when it comes to stuffing your bear, I've got 2 pieces here. This is a foot pad and a leg that I have previously stuffed. And the more stuffing, the better. It's like turkey dinner. You want that turkey stuffing, so you try and get as much into that bird as you possibly can. Same with this. It's really important to make sure that your product is really well stuffed and firm to the touch. On this one, I've stuffed and stuffed and stuffed, and your hands do tend to get a bit sore. That's another one of my tools, is your hands, your fingers, and especially your thumb for stuffing. Now, when I take a piece that needs to be stuffed, such as this leg, I look at it and I find I have a good look at the corners. Now, this corner here needs to be really firmly stuffed. You don't want that flattened in and just shove stuffing up to there. You want that edge to be really well pushed out, as on this one here. You can see the how nice and rounded that edge is. So any piece that you do, pick it up, have a good look, see where your corners or areas that need to be really focused on stuffing, and work on those first. Now, when you're actually going to take your stuffing, what I do suggest, don't take a wad. Just take small increment pieces and then just put them in using your, and I always start, if it's a foot pad, I always start at the bottom of the project. I take my fiber and I stick it into the opening and then push it down. By using small amounts, it gives you a lot more maneuverability, and you've got lots more to work with without having big lumps with your stuffing. So this takes a long time to do. It's not something that you're just gonna shove the stuffing in and have it done in 5-10 minutes. So as you're going along, what you're gonna do is small pieces again and insert it into your leg, and then take your thumb, making sure that you're getting that really pushed right to the edges. Now work it, and always when you're doing your stuffing, work it around. Don't just stuff one area in one way. Turn it, check it, and stuff again. As you can see back with the leg, I've gone in and I've taken my thumb and I go to the sides, I go to the back, I come around to the other side. So you're constantly checking and pushing your stuffing in. That's going to give you a really nice formed stuffing level, and it'll give you a much better outcome for your project. So as I say, this particular foot took me maybe about an hour to do. Now, one of the other things with the stuffing is I go about halfway up on the leg, and then I go up to the top, because this is quite floppy because there's no stuffing in it, and then I start to push the stuffing in up towards the top. And then I'll concentrate on pushing down, pushing up, and pushing back, so that you're constantly leaving a big space, especially when you're working on like a body, such as this body. I will fill all the outer edges first, and then I'll concentrate on filling the inside in the middle. And I might spend maybe an hour just pushing to the sides, and then pushing into the middle. Now, the biggest take home for this is take your time, make sure that you're pleased with it. If I wasn't pleased with it, I'd take it all out and start again, but constantly going back to it. Now, once you've completely finished stuffing, just leave it. Don't close it at that point, because I leave it and then I go back maybe tomorrow, and I can always add more stuffing. So you let it sit for a bit, and then you can go back in, and then you can carry on with your little bits of stuffing and pushing it back in. Then when you're finished and you're really pleased with how the stuffing is, take your felting needle and then felt it down, and then you can still even add more stuffing. On certain pieces, you know, if you're closing it at the top with a circular stitch, you can use your felting needle to really push it in, and get it nice and firm. So I'm actually quite pleased with this one. I'm going to leave it because I just finished it about 10 minutes ago. And I'm going to go back later and I'm going to carry on putting some more stuffing in. The more, when it comes to stuffing, I think it's the more is better. So the last thing is when you do go to close and you're ready to finally close your piece, normally you'll do like a ladder stitch for a closure. If I mentioned before, I had made that little line on my sewing machine. I'm going to utilize those 2 lines when I'm stitching it closed to pull them together by using that. Now, the other tip is when you're actually closing it, go maybe 2 or 3 stitches, take a little extra little piece and throw it in and push it in underneath. At the end of that, you're not going to have a dip in your sewing like that. You'll have a nice curved edge. So those are some of the tips about stuffing. The whole thing is take your time and also always look at your curves. Like this head is going to take me quite a while because I'm going to put emphasis on areas that are curved. Because you spend the time making it, you want to really have a good, solid, firm, almost like a baseball feel to your project. So I hope that helps. I'll carry on stuffing and then I'll have to give my hands a rest. Okay, one last tip on the completion of stuffing your particular project is usually you have to put a running stitch around to insert your disc to finish off your head or whatever you're doing. Now, what I do is I take a running stitch all the way around, but what I do is, if you look very closely, you'll see I've started, but when I've brought the running stitch around, I've actually gone past where that initial stitch went in. Now, when you go to tie that, I don't know why, but for some reason it stays nice and tight rather than having it loosen and having to constantly pull it to keep it tight. So I find that works really well, even if you're doing things like yo-yos or anything that you're having to pull, anything that you have to pull tight. Always go 1 extra stitch around and then tie off. The other thing I do is I always use heavy-duty cotton thread or any kind of really heavy-duty thread so that you're not going to be breaking when you're pulling tight. Pulling tight and having it nice and firm is really an important process in the completion of your project.